evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Mason. I serve as the manager of North People's Assembly, which is hosting this meeting, the second meeting of the series for MX3 zoning in the East Ward. I see some familiar faces from Monday's meeting. I thank you for coming back. And to you first-timers to this meeting, I appreciate you coming. At this time, I'd like to ask the center's host, Mr. Joe De La Fave, to come up to say a couple words. Did he leave out?
No, he's right here.
Right in front of me.
Right here. Thank
Excuse
you.
me. Here you are.
Thank you, Andrea. Welcome, everyone. So this is the Ironbound Early Learning Center. This is our Birth to Five Center, part of the Ironbound Community Corporation. So I just wanted to welcome everybody here. We're happy to host this on behalf of the city in order to provide opportunities for people to engage with the city on this really important issue. I just want to add that we know how important this is and how critical it is to some of you and how deeply many people feel about this issue. But I do want to stress that this is a public discourse that we should be having this evening. I want to stress that there should be mutual respect in the course of this evening for one another. We should be talking and listening to one another. Hopefully we're all listening really nicely and really well. But just wanted to stress that aspect of things. And as the host, I certainly do want to make sure that we uphold the values, that are part of Ironbound Community Corporation, two of which are transparency and mutual respect. And we hope that applies for everybody, not just obviously for you or for me, but obviously for the city folks. And we appreciate you being here and coming down in order to engage in this. So let's have a nice public civil discourse this evening and move on. Thank you very much.
We appreciate it, and thanks for your hospitality. So I just want to,
Bathrooms are down the hall, and make a right at the end of the hall, and you'll find them on your right there. And there's coffee in the back.
No cream.
such a host. Coffee in the back. So I also want to just state that this is a community meeting, so it is serving as a town hall, and it will be in such that style. But we're not just going to ask questions randomly. I will point you out, and then you'll ask your question, it'll be answered, or it'll be discussed, and then we'll entertain the next one. I just don't want it to become disorganized and to have a ruckus in here. So if you just, as Joe said, just be respectful of each other, it would make for a great meeting. At this time, I'm going to ask Deputy Mayor and Director of Housing and Economic Development, John Palmieri, to open with a presentation for MX3.
Good evening, everyone. Andrea, thank you for the invitation to speak. Joe, thank you for hosting the event. This is a beautiful facility. I got a special tour several months ago, and I know several other city officials who are here tonight have gotten a chance to walk through the facility and appreciate the wonderful place that it is for children. This is our second community meeting. There will, of course, be another council meeting. There will be a planning board meeting. There will be a third planned community meeting for early December, and I think that date has been established as December 6th. And so, obviously, we are making every effort to listen to the community, identify issues, see whether we can reach agreement as we move forward in presenting our draft ordinance to the council. A few things, points that the mayor made that I think are just very important to consider here tonight. This is not being created out of whole cloth, this zoning ordinance that we are presenting. This presentation was made in large measure about a year ago, and with a few improvements that have been made, it reflects the sentiment that existed on the part of the mayor and the city council and public officials to create a little bit of height within a very discrete district that has been identified on the map and in the ordinances that are available for inspection on the front table. And so we're not coming in with some wild new idea. This is all based on good urban design and ability for this district, in our judgment, to accommodate some height, to accommodate a mixed-use presence, to, in fact, accommodate a height that will not exceed 145 feet. I know that many of you who were here at the last meeting heard those points. That is quite different from the ordinance that was initially presented a little over a year ago that would have permitted a height of up to 200 feet based on certain other things that get accomplished in terms of site size. So we've limited that. We've in fact listened to the community and believe that we are identifying a height that makes some sense. Good design, step backs, public uses, sustainability improvements that need to be done, infrastructure improvements that the planning board may well require developers who present plans will need to make. And so we think we have a very good working plan. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think we had a very strong plan that we would ask you to consider. Obviously, we know that a number of questions and concerns were expressed at the last meeting. Those are under review. Certain comments were made to me in writing that we are reviewing with staff. And so please know that. We'll have another meeting on the 6th. This is our second. The council will have a full meeting, and as well as our planning board. So we intend to fully vet this proposal that we have drafted in the form of an ordinance, and are hoping that you'll stay with us as we make progress through the next several weeks. That being said, and I don't know if there are any questions, I have Chris Watson, who is our chief planning officer, here to make a more detailed presentation. I know that we've got tables. The ordinance is very specific. There may be other things that need to be adjusted or made more clear. Obviously, we're prepared to make those adjustments and listen to other concerns that will, in fact, allow us to improve the ordinance. But for now, I just wanted to open it up to let you know that on Monday, we began the presentation process. We're continuing today. We'll conclude the community meeting process on the 6th, and then from there, I'll go through the planning board and council process.
Do you know what date the planning board will meet, John?
The 3rd. December 3rd. December 3rd.
December 3rd.
Okay, so Monday. Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Do you know what the timeline is for amending the ordinance based on feedback?
Well, we'll have until the council takes its final vote toward the end of December.
Yes.
And so between now and then, roughly over the next 3.5 weeks, we believe that any changes, any adjustments can be made and then incorporated and brought to the attention of the council for their vote.
You can't give us a specific date as to when we'll know whether or not any changes are being made?
Well, they may be made over the course of the next few weeks, but certainly no later than the council meeting at the end of December.
John, hi, thanks. Follow-up, because at the council meeting yesterday, they specifically referred to the December 11th meeting, which is the first meeting that's over the legally required minimum. So is that not true? It's December 11th?
I'm not sure. Chris, let me hand this over to Chris. I think Chris has details on when the council and planning board meet and other elements of the ordinance that are relevant and that we can allow Chris to talk about and then take questions.
He'll know if it's possible that it goes to the appointment meeting?
Yes.
Thank you.
To your question, James, there is a possibility that the council will hear this on the 11th, as long as it gets through the planning board meeting on Monday with the type of feedback we'll get from the public with recommendations as to what they would like to see the planning board recommend to the council in terms of how we amend this legislation. Yes, sir.
Yeah, why are you doing this so quickly? This is a major change. You say it's a little bit of a hike. You're increasing the height 3 times beyond what is there now. This is a neighborhood where we care very deeply about the quality of life, the fabric, and the historical qualities. What's the rush? Why are you rushing this with the planning board on Monday? I got notice for this meeting before, Thanksgiving Eve. It wasn't able to be in the papers to get people here. Why are you rushing this?
So we don't see it as being Russian at all, sir.
You know, yeah, but it's going to the planning board on Monday. It was approved at the city council yesterday. It feels like this is out of control, and who has time to prepare and even see what's going on?
Well, again, right to your point, like we don't see it being rushed because one of the reasons why we're here is to hear comments so that we can improve this. So certainly tonight is not a rushed event. It's an event where people can come and present to us concerns so that we could make this better. The idea is that this is not something new, as John said. This is something we've been discussing for over a year now, right? And we just know that we have to take into consideration,
But if I can say,
Mr. West,
for over
Mr.
a
West.
year, it's been
Mr. West.
contentious for over a year and met with a lot of resistance in the community. And it's every time, it just feels like it's before a summer weekend or whatever, to get the least amount of participation. That's how it feels as a community member, as a citizen of the city that you're
Let him
working for.
just talk.
Next question?
Yes, Joe.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Yeah, I think just as a follow-up to the previous questions, it certainly does appear to be rushed in the eyes of, I think, just about everybody here. There's not been a discussion about this in the last year. There was an intensive discussion about it when it was introduced last year, but there's not been any discussion of it since then. There's not been any community discussion of it since then. So this is restarting the process again. And when you contrast this with some other policy development matters in the city, such as the inclusionary zoning ordinance, where numerous meetings took place over a long period of time to try to get to a good place and a consensus place. And I can bring up other similar matters as that. This doesn't have that process. Now, John had mentioned earlier that, there'll be a process, or this is a process for reaching agreement. But similar to Chris's question about a timeline or people's concerns about it being rushed, what is the process for reaching agreement? Because you've heard concerns, but what is that process for actually reaching agreement?
Well, I can tell you, we have met not only with the community at large, but we've met also with those groups that are most interested in MX3 and this
You haven't met with
neighborhood.
Ironbound Community Corporation.
Pardon me?
You haven't met with Ironbound Community Corporation.
Well, if we haven't met with Ironbound Community Corporations, we've certainly spoke to you, Joe, right? Until
In the
here,
last 3 days.
and all of your concerns that we heard in the last 3
Are you
days.
defining that as a process?
Well, again, it is part of a process, and because this is not something new, we have learned from the past process, and why you would not have heard from us within a year, because up to a few months ago, MX3 was law. It was challenged and we lost, and we're restarting that. So there was no need for a community dialogue for something that existed.
I agree. Are you guys just responding because you said
Yes.
we've been talking about it for a year?
Yes.
And obviously we haven't.
If I can just say this, and the mayor made, I think, some important remarks on Monday. Obviously, this is not a new thing. And to Chris's point, we believe that this was a sustainable and approved ordinance until a month and a half ago. And so this shouldn't come as a surprise. In fact, what we tried to do is consider reduction of height, and as well as making certain other improvements that will moderate the question of elevation regarding these new development programs. But the one other thing, this is the process. We're having 3 meetings, the planning board will review it, the council represents the interests of the neighborhoods and the people it serves, and they will be obviously taking a hard look at this. They made some comments just a few days ago about what they intend to do to make sure that people are listened to. But the one thing that the mayor said is that this is our time. Every city that has a transit hub permits elevation around the hub. It isn't a huge surprise. We've been very careful in designing a district, in designing the parameters of a district that will support transportation, that will limit parking, but will provide for some height. Buildings don't have to be that high. They will be limited to being no higher than 145 feet. So we may be getting proposals in for 70 and 80 and 90-foot buildings. Nevertheless, the mayor talked about the need to move with some speed because we have opportunities now. The investment community, the development community have been talking to us about things that they want to do. And many in this room may say, keep it at 50 feet. developers will not be able to realize a return on investment unless they can take full advantage of these lots that exist. Now, that being said, our responsibility is to make sure that nothing is overdone and that we're sensitive to the built environment and to the community. But we believe that close to Railroad Avenue, within that 3-block kind of radius, more or less, 7 blocks, you know, bounded by Green and Edison, and as far to the east as Union, we have a district that we believe makes sense for that type height. And time is of the essence. The mayor stated it. I would agree as the development director. I'm not a planning professional by trade, but this is the chance for us to get some investment, create some jobs, provide some housing, and make improvements within a community where many lots have been underutilized and are in disrepair. So that's the argument that I would make.
Just a moment.
So guys,
Take the mic, please.
I talk about it. So good evening. So one of the things I'm gonna ask, if possible, I recognize you guys don't like the speed that it's going. I understand that. But what we really want from you all is substance as far as the thing that you want, different recommendations. What we don't want to do is this. We don't want to walk away from this tomorrow and say, okay, we know that they don't like the fact that we're doing it at this time, etc. But then we don't have your input about the substance. So if possible, just give us some details about what you want as far as substance, so we can take it down, and we can consider that, and then at least we can be able to say, you know what, the community wants the following, as opposed to how fast. Okay?
Yeah.
There's a question in the back. Can you come to the front so you can get on the mic? And just for future questions, if you wouldn't mind coming to the front so you can be, after you're acknowledged, so we can hear you.
Just two things, but the first one, I want to go back to the community and this whole year and nobody knowing about anything.
Hold up the mic.
I just found out about what was going on literally 3 days ago. And because the people are not warned of things like this should only be put a small sign up wherever they're going to do the construction, like at the end of when things are about to just happen. Because then enough of the community doesn't have enough time to get involved or voice their opinions. We are all taxed until the yang, but yet we don't have a voice. A lot of the people, there's 2 people here tonight that don't know one word of English. They were never let known about anything that was going on. So I believe that things should be more publicized so people could prepare to have their voices heard. That's one. But you said something as far as these investors wanting to use, the maximum space they can. They want to take full advantage of whatever piece of property they buy. But
That's not what I said.
Well, you said something about that. Because obviously if somebody's going to buy, let's say 2 acres, they want to get every inch of those 2 acres. But in doing that, what happens to the neighbor that's next to where they're going to build? And just on Main Street, this is just one example, just on Main Street where they're planning to also build something, the street is already totally congested. And they clearly have on their papers that they will not, there's not enough space for parking, and they're not going to be able to provide enough parking space for who's coming in. So here we are paying high taxes, and there's more people coming to build these high buildings, taking more spaces, taking more space in school. This is looking at just one apartment that has a couple in it. Both of them are going to have cars. Where are they going to park if they're going to provide one space or maybe no space for the apartments? And the schools are so congested. What about using some of those properties for our children? That's what we, I guess, I'm not the only one that's worried about.
So what was the address of the issue?
Andrea, can I just address one thing?
And Chris has the next question.
So just to your points, right, ma'am? We recognize that there's a multilingual community, right? Unfortunately, I don't speak a different language but English. We do have one of our staff here that can translate in, I think Lygia speaks 5 different languages, including Mandarin. The flyers that were sent out in different languages for tonight's meeting and the meeting on Monday.
They were sent out, I'm sorry.
Right.
All due respect, where were they sent? Because I didn't get any. Did anybody get flyers in their house? No.
So we didn't do a mailing to every individual home, right, with flyers. But on your second point, you were talking about people who are going to be affected by this development. So by law, we must notice within 200 feet of this upzoning district, all residents. When the city lost this lawsuit, we actually lost this lawsuit, not on the substantiveness of this ordinance, but we actually lost the lawsuit on our failure to proper notice. And we take heed of that.
That's not true. That's not true. Just one moment. Just one moment.
Right? Tomorrow, I can look at you dead in your eye and assure you, everyone that is going to be affected by this, by Saturday, will get 2 mails at their address. 1 regular and 1 certified. Because we are legally obligated to do that.
Yeah, but we're telling me by tomorrow, by Saturday.
Yeah.
But what about this whole year?
Again, right?
And how did we all come here today? It's just by pushing word of mouth because we didn't get any notice.
So, again,
I'm sorry, let me just give you one example, okay? Next to my mom's house, okay?
What street are we talking about
She
here?
received it, I'm talking about the corner of Main. and
13 Main.
Okay? One of the developers that's on the agenda, they already built one of the buildings. My mother never received a letter because she would have brought it to me and I would have most certainly made sure I was at that variance meeting.
okay, so,
No, wait, and she's had her house for 50 years. And do you know that they built their building like this? You can't fit one finger between the building. Damaged the whole side of her house while she yelled at the top of her lungs out her window and they shut her whole side of the house like a tomb. Where was the city to protect her from this? And this is why we're afraid. Now they're continuing to build on the other side in already congested streets. So I just want to know how whatever is going on is going to protect us.
all right, so there are 2 things you're bringing up in terms of noticing, right? So what we are trying to do here is create a new zone, right? So by law, we need, as a city, to notify all of the residents that will be affected by this. So we need to do that. With your mother's example, right? It's something totally different. The new building that you speak of that is now erected, right? Before they could have gotten approval from either the planning or the zoning board to have that building erected, 10 days prior to either one of those meetings, the developer needs to prove to the city that there were public notices. Let me finish. Their public noticing requirement isn't as stringent as ours. They need to put signs up where the construction is going to occur. For us, we need to send out a mailing, again, 2 mailings, registered and regular posts to all of the affected residents 200 feet from where we are trying to rezone. So I hear what you're saying, but I just want you to understand that the requirements are different. We are not legally obligated to notify residents as to what was going to be or what is a proposed development. Developers do that by law and they have to do it.
But if the developers don't do what's in the laws and you are not obligated, well, who is protecting us poor souls that are paying the taxes?
Well, again, right? So the developer at Main and Ferry Street, where your mom lives, right, demonstrated 10 days before they brought their plans to the planning or zoning board that the public was notified in terms of putting one of those same signs you talk about on their site, right? We are not legally obligated to send out the type of mailing we'll be sending out tomorrow. It's just a matter of you know, I don't know, I understand what you're...
I'm going to keep harping at
Yeah, but...
you're not legally obligated.
Yeah.
So why are
But-
we here? What can you do
No,
for us?
no, but again, when that developer puts out that sign, right, it says public, here, take notice, we're going to be presenting this application to the relevant board, be it the planning board or the zoning board. Is at that moment that you take credence to that and turn up to the planning and zoning board and say, you know what, planning and zoning board, you know, at the corner of Main and Ferry, where my mother has been living for 50 years, this is the type of development that is coming here. And although I know by law and zoning, it is a permissible development, I take, you know, umbrage to this. I think you should be more judicious. I think you shouldn't allow this. I think you shouldn't allow this. And tell your neighbors to come with you, because that's part of the process.
Yes,
That's part of that
but when they
process.
started with their the day they started with the bulldozers.
You asked a series of questions. We
Yeah,
need to
but he's
get,
addressing me, so I'm answering.
right, but it's becoming a back and forth. If you can just state your question, let him answer it, and then we go to the next, I would appreciate it.
What we'll do is
Actually, we can talk after this, ma'am. We can talk. We can talk after this, right? All right.
Thank you. Chris?
Chris.
Okay, so I just want to go over a little bit of history of the MX3, because I think this has been glossed over. The MX3 was introduced, I believe it was in early 2017, came in at a 20-story zone for these 9 blocks. Okay, so there was a hearing before the planning board, which devolved into 3 hours of yelling and screaming because the neighbors do not want this. And the city they heard that, they had a public meeting at the Portuguese Sports Club. Once again, it devolved into a lot of yelling and screaming because, once again, the neighborhood does not want this. The city revised the ordinance, came back, and they told us it was a 12-story ordinance. And if you look at the ordinance that was actually adopted by council, and you can get it online, the maximum height for a ground floor commercial with residential or commercial above is 145 feet. So when you say that the city has lowered the height to 145 feet, I see a change of 0. So I don't see what change substantively has been made with this ordinance. So I don't see where we're getting decreased heights. On another point, there's talk about trying to beat this cycle. We're pushing down development just because we want to catch the last tailwinds of this economic cycle. When there's a lot of problems with this neighborhood. We have combined sewer system that regularly floods on a regular basis. You have a good rain, cars are getting flooded and destroyed. I've got a friend who had a car destroyed because of a flood. These are serious issues. And the municipal land use law has mechanisms where you can have a capital improvement plan where you specify the sort of improvements you want to make to your infrastructure, including sewer infrastructure. And you develop a way to create a pro rata share for cost. And then you can actually charge the developers to replace that infrastructure. You can also do this through redevelopment plans, and with pilots you can require developers to change this infrastructure. There are ways to do development here that is smart. It takes time, it may not catch this economic cycle, but if you tell the neighbors in this area that, yeah, they're gonna get 12 stories of buildings, but they're no longer gonna have their cars flooded out on New Jersey Railroad Avenue, you might actually get agreement here. There are ways to do development that will be actually very smart and not just benefit the few landowners there, but actually benefit the larger neighborhood. And I think it's a shame that the city is not taking this opportunity to do things the right way. And instead, we're going to get stuck with 50 years of wrong development.
All right, Chris. So, 2 things to address, right? So, when we look at the last ordinance, and this is the type of feedback I got from yourself and many others in the room, there was some ambiguity as to what the maximum height and floors allowed in the old MX3 ordinance, which was 20 floors. When we read the bulk and height standards for high-rise multi-dwellings, right? We've revised that to say that in this new MX3 ordinance, the height standard is going to be 145 feet, period. And the 2 of us had good dialogue before this meeting about that. And I do take your recommendation to heart that throughout this table where we make those definitions, we should make that more clear. And that will happen, right? And the second thing, if you read this ordinance and you go to our improved sustainability standards, there's a fact sheet that was shared out, and you look at number 5, right? What we're talking about is the type of things and number 5 reads, incorporate additional on-site stormwater management measures and low-impact development strategies. We are thinking about flooding. We are thinking about some of the same issues you are addressing and ways in which we could mitigate those things by making it a requirement, not a conditional, but a requirement for buildings over 8 stories. So it's not something that we are not aware of. It's not something we're not going to be proactive about. In thinking about this city's future, these are all the things we have to think about. We're not just thinking about this economic cycle and how we capture this, the wealth of this economic cycle, but we're also thinking that currently, with our eyes here, there are many people in Newark that need affordable housing. We know that currently there are many people in this neighborhood also that are looking for job opportunities. We know that currently this is a time where we can do the type of transit-oriented development that the master plan speaks about. So opportunity is here, and it will go against prudence not to strike at opportunity.
So I guess two items. One, in terms of the height, the city told us it was 145 feet. Planning work found a loophole that would allow 20 stories. Loophole was closed. I don't see that as a game. I see that as fixing an error. I'm assuming that was an error on the city's part, and that is being fixed. And we appreciate that it's being fixed, but we still don't see the decrease in height. In terms of item number 5 of the sustainability standards, this is purely for on-site impact of the rain that falls on the site. Now, I'm a licensed professional planner. I do testimony before boards. I sit before boards. I hear engineers come in, and what they will say is that the lot is already 100% covered. So when we build this building with 100% lot coverage, it's not changing anything. It's not generating any new stormwater flow. Therefore, we don't have to do anything. What I'm saying is there are ways not only to address stormwater on site, but actually to address it off site as well. And also, one thing that item number 5 does not address is the 1,000 toilets that are going to be added to this combined sewer system. Requiring these off-site improvements of infrastructure will address both issues. This is an opportunity the city is missing out on.
And I want to go back, and I don't want to have a back and forth banter about this, and I do take your observation seriously, but in a matter of zoning a district, right? These type of concerns are not lost on us. That's why we have an engineering department. That's why we have a department of sewer. Because when these developers are now going to take advantage of what we have zoned, it's at this level where this conversation really becomes what we will allow to be built, But from the planning perspective, what we are doing here is allowing for us to have that conversation as to what those projects looks like.
There's no teeth.
Okay, before Mr. West has his question, and then the gentleman in the back, and then you, Juan wanted to add something.
Corollary to what Joe said, the maximum lot coverage ratio is 60%, not 100%.
Yes.
And there's down to about 145 feet. Ferry Street is protected to 5 stories, 100 feet near Ferry Street. Any residential surface on Ferry Street cannot exceed, as proposed in MX3, 5 stories. So it's disingenuous to say that everything's going to be built at 145 feet, right? And secondly, in terms of infrastructure, but it should be stated for the matter of transparency, right? So, and I work with the city, I'm a planning researcher, but the reality that the proposal puts in place protective measures regarding the scale. Secondly, the master plan does not place a height limit on Ferry Street. It says mid-rise is 8 stories and 20 stories, and to build where appropriate, and recommends building around Penn Station. You can see it in the master plan, I brought it with me. You don't argue me, it's in the master plan. So it never imposed a height limit on Ferry Street. Never. 20 stories was allowed, it was recommendation. And I'm not wrong, I can show it to you.
We're gonna stay respectful. Mr. West has the question, and then the gentleman in the white shirt.
Well, I'm glad you want to talk about substance.
Mr. West, get the mic.
And that's what we should be doing here. That's what we should take the time to do. But why was this put in front of the council for approval yesterday when you want to talk about substance? It seems like this is just something you're checking off your list. Oh, we had a community meeting and we're done. Anyway, from our point of view, this has nothing we want, but it has everything that 3 developers want. And you are saying we need to jump on this moment. There's nothing stopping the developers who own land on the other side of McCarter Highway to do transit-oriented development, high-rise. Nothing stopping them at all. So why are you smashing this ironbound? It has nothing that we want. What we want we want a major new park, we want schools, we want community gardens, we want a theater, we want the fire station restored, we want arts and culture and education, we want a dog run. There's none of this. You're saying the planning board is here to protect us, or the zoning board? The parcel on Union Street was approved against community opposition at 1 a.m. And even though the developer rewrote this ordinance, he's not even able to adhere to a setback. So this has been submitted to the City of Newark, 2013, Newark Economic Development Corporation. You say you want substance and comments. I don't believe it. It doesn't feel real. So what do you say to that?
So as far as the,
Can you guys take the mic, please?
so as far as the reason, the fact that it was on the council agenda yesterday, we should at least all know, or at least let you know that, of course, before it's adopted, that's when you all can also make the comments that you want at the council. And with that said, right, the council members can decide, you know what, we want to change certain things on this because of the comments that you make here. Council members can also get a copy of the notes that we have here and say, you know what, these are some of the things that people from the community asked for, and you know what, we want this to be in it before we pass it. So I don't want you all to believe that because it went through first reading yesterday, that it means that it's over with, because that's not the truth. The truth is that it has to be, it has to go through the process once it can, and when it comes back to the municipal council, you also have an opportunity to voice your opinions there, and the council members have the ability to amend the ordinance.
But substantive changes have to be reintroduced, right?
But again,
So then you're just delaying the process. Why not delay it up front?
but again, that's the process.
That's not necessarily the process.
Okay, next question. Can you step up?
All right, thank you. So a couple things, you wanted specifics, appreciate that. Just like to point out that it goes both ways. Appreciate some of the great general answers the respondents have given, but we want to make sure that you don't run out the clock. So we're going to try to get everyone's voice heard. The second thing is that I got a reply sheet that you guys had put together based on the comments from the city from last Monday, which was good. But of the 7 items,
We're listening.
I'm sorry.
it's the kind of non-listening that,
No,
gets
we're-
it's
no.
exactly what one of our, so of the 7 items, 4 of them are completely meaningless and irrelevant to the issue at hand. So that leaves 3, which would have left you with a less than 1.5-page response. And would, if it was a 6th grade report, you would have gotten an incomplete. Again, that's the kind of thing that comes back and it just infuriates people. So to get to the real specifics, why is this legislation being rushed? The city of Newark must be proactive in its volatile community. That doesn't mean anything. It's completely vague. And the question was way more specific. Why December 31st? What's that magic number? who's pushing that, why, who benefits from that, what's the harm in going till January 15th or March 1st, you know, specifically. People come up and they go, oh, there's some deal or somebody's going to, or whatever. Maybe they don't have to do inclusionary zoning or whatever, but it's hard to really respond to that because we don't know, but it's a legitimate concern that has not, frankly, just has not been addressed. Also, the 145 feet over that, as you know, needs a variance. So we appreciate that language for 145 feet was in there, but as anyone in Newark knows and will tell you, variances are handed out, not disrespectful, but really are handed out like candy at the zoning board. So in effect, we've asked for meaningful change and meaningful input and meaningful difference, but in effect, that's just like a 2-week or whatever delay for developers, so we can get anything over 145 feet up to 200, or maybe the sky's the limit. I really don't know. So we're just frankly, it's just not satisfactory. It's not good enough. It doesn't do what you're saying it's going to do in the real world. Next, 20 stories, and then it shall not exceed 145 feet. How is that number arrived at? I mean, that's a very specific number. What exactly, where did that come from? And you said that the change originally was actually, we saw a draft that was 10 stories, and this was when we were talking about stories, not feet. So how did it go from 10 stories up to 145 feet? And then we look back and we see that there was the one project that was voided by the judge's order was exactly 141 feet and 4 inches high. Those numbers are very, very close. I think it's like, 0.5% difference, and it really makes you wonder how that number was arrived at. We haven't gotten a satisfactory answer to that. And lastly, again, about the process and the conversation, with all due respect, you are having meetings, you're following it as you have to, but there really have been no substantive changes yet. So it's not really a conversation, it's just a one-way thing, which again goes back to last year and this year. And I just got to say it because, it's one of our main concerns. It's not meaningful and it's not believable to us based on everything that's happened, not only last year, but in the last couple of weeks, that as her great council president said, that meaningful changes will be made, or was said here today. It's just not believable. It just does not seem like a discussion or a conversation. Thank you.
Oh, so, Mr. Powell, do you have a question, or these are just comments?
Those were comments. I
Okay.
mean, again, the two things about why 145 feet, the variances don't do what they say they're going to do, and why is it being rushed? Those are unanswered questions.
So speak to the height of the 10 to 2 versus now. Speak to the stuff that you sent over that was already in the ordinance.
Yeah, so, I get it.
Meetings as well.
Yeah, so, is it fair to say, James, you're here with Plan Newark, right?
And as a resident.
And as a resident. And is it also fair to admit that we have met with Plan Newark twice? Twice. You've had an audience with the mayor. You've had an audience with Cooperation Council. Twice. We have
Not disputing any of that.
You have submitted to us.
We stipulate.
You've submitted to us several documents with specifics.
Correct.
I have met with you.
Correct.
With that document, with this ordinance, specifically with our senior planner Upendra, right?
Yep.
And I've said, James, apart from this height dispute of 10 floors
Yes.
and 145 feet,
Right.
please point out to me,
Right.
what else is this sticking point? What else this ordinance doesn't address? Because we look at your, we look at your sustainability standards, and then we look at our sustainability standards, and what we see is that not only do we meet your sustainability standards, but we've surpassed it. And we've surpassed it even before you recommended it. So it is a bit disingenuous.
It's not disingenuous.
It is a bit disingenuous to say that
representation of the meeting.
it's a bit disingenuous to say we are not listening and we are not responding to what we are hearing.
I didn't say you weren't listening. I just said that there hasn't been any meaningful changes. And we don't, again, the thing has been not just listening, because I know you have to have these meetings, and that's fine, and I know you have to meet first and second time, and I know it has to go to the planning board. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, are you actually going to change anything? We haven't seen that. And we responded with a very long narrative letter about why we didn't feel that all of those sustainability things, et cetera, were not included. We are good faith response to that, haven't heard back. But the two other issues besides the 145 feet or 10 stories or 20 or whatever were, again, the fact that the variances is a really meat espers, variances that have some teeth in it. But there, you know, a guy can come in and do the variance, go to the zoning board, there's no opportunity for community input or opposition. You just have to hold it in public. So there's really, it's meaningless in the real world. And then again, lastly, the thing of why December 31st.
Yeah, so ICO,
Please don't call, you know, really.
ICO as an ordinance,
Right.
ICO as an ordinance takes effect January 1st, right? As it is right now, MX3 does not exist. So there's no way, absolutely no way, we could be here saying we represent any backdoor deals. No way, absolutely no way, because this ordinance becomes law on December 31st. The next day we all drink champagne and welcome 2019. And you know what we also welcome?
I don't know what that means, but okay.
We also welcome the IZO. That's what we also welcome. And we welcome applications in any zone, anywhere in this city that must meet IZO recommendations.
We get that, not understanding.
Okay, I'm gonna just reiterate so that everybody can hear. Please speak into the mic. We're not having a one-on-one conversation with the panel. It's a community meeting, so I need for everybody to stand about here so you can be recorded on video, everyone can hear you, and that the panel can see you and you don't seem a little overbearing, okay? Thank you.
Good evening, sure. Can we rush in the folks in the front, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, I just wanted to address, you talked that you didn't want to speak about process, but I do think that it's a good problem to have people who care to the death about a neighborhood.
Yeah.
The bad problem for a city is when nobody cares, right? That creates a whole different set of problems. And so I think that the framing here in this conversation since 2017 has been very adversarial because there was trust broken, right, between the city administration and involved residents who had really done a lot of, put in a lot of time and effort developing this zoning and developing a plan for how Newark would develop. And there was a sense of trust that was broken, you know, and I just want to step back and, you know, thinking about how it was discussed that this is the process. We know, and it was already said, we know what it looks like when the city wants to collaborate because we've been through it. We've met months and months before anything ever touched council. We're in conversation and conversation and conversation. And so it's the urgency here that is very unsettling because urgency usually has urgency makes us feel, as has already been stated, that there is something we can't see that's at stake. Because what is at stake? Very vague things have been said over and over again. There's a moment. What moment? Describe it. When is it ending? When did it start? Why is it going to end in 3 months? Why, if we don't do it now, do people suddenly get itchy? You know, like, it really begs, and the funny part is I think sometimes a lack of transparency, not coming from a bad place, just like as a rule, makes people suspicious even when there's not something to be suspicious of. It puts people in power in a bad position even when they're not doing bad, right? And so I think that transparency would help this a lot. And also just, if you rush it, we will resist. I think that's basically the thing here. So people, we don't want to talk about process. If you rush it, we will resist. And there will be adversarial relationship where there could be a building relationship. Where we could help, because the people here who fight against things, we fight just as hard for things. You know, we don't have to be against each other. We can actually work towards something that's even more beautiful than either one of us could imagine. Right? That's what an actual collaboration can look like between residents and a city government. And I just think that this is an example where The residents are being treated as a stumbling block. Why can't they see? They are against progress. It's so backwards. Everybody's doing it. I mean, I know if anybody has like an intimate relationship, right? Like you're in a marriage and your partner says, I want to do something, and you say, why? Because everybody's doing it. That's not good enough. Like me and you gotta figure this out, right? Like I'm not gonna base something else based on what everybody else is doing. I grew up in Hoboken, New Jersey. I will never again be able to live there, right? You can't live there unless you're in subsidized housing or you bought something in like 1961. So, you know, I don't want to hear that it's good enough to do what everybody else is doing. Because Hoboken, New Jersey is a shell of a place. And Ironbound could be that exact same shell of a place. That's real cute, and that's why people came, and now it's impossible to live here. It was brought up, I don't want to be overly, you know, I don't want to take up too much time, I want us to talk, but it was brought up that one point was brought up, and I needed to be stomped out and never said again, that this is for affordable housing. That is an affront. That is an affront. Every new development, I have personally been somebody looking for housing in the Ironbound, and every new development, I have not seen a single thing underneath $1,500 for a studio apartment. That, I don't know, like, perhaps I'm out of touch with what you consider affordable housing, but when I'm talking to, you know, when we're down in the Ironbound, 2 and 3 bedroom houses, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, we're going for $1,300 or $1,400, and now we're talking about a studio at $1,500. So I don't appreciate it talking about for affordable housing. A big number that I've heard circulated is what we feel comfortable with is 120 feet, 10 stories. That is like a compromise, a coming together, a show of good faith on both sides. We don't want 10 stories. We think that it's going to completely alter the landscape. But we know that the city really wants something, so we're moving towards how can we move forward together. And so 120 feet, 10 stories is, you know, I think if you did that, you would be showing good faith that you actually do care what residents say, that this meeting is not a farce. This meeting is not just a checkbox, but you have to make a substantive change if people are telling you over and over again the same thing. The last thing that I'm going to say is, you know, something that hasn't been mentioned, it's been somewhat mentioned, is climate change is coming and Ironbound is going to be dramatically affected. It's not if, it's when, right? We're going into a time when things as we know it, life as we know it in this neighborhood is going to drastically change. And if we continue to develop housing in the same old way, it's going, in 10 years, all of this could be moot. This could all be a moot point. Like, we need to start thinking out of the box about what does sustainable development look like in terms of climate adaptation. Adaptability to the fact that the flood zones are rising and rising and rising and rising and rising. You know, so us at Ironbound Community Corporation, we do a lot of climate justice work. In other, you know, Ras Baraka, when we were doing the CCRB, he sat us down way before we ever went to, and he said, what do you all think? I have my best thinkers here. What can we put together? Let's make a brainchild. You know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't like, oh, here's the paper, what do you say, yes or no? It wasn't like that. It was like, how can we put all of our knowledge together and come up with the best thing the city could ever have? And that's what we can do here, but not in a rush. So thank you.
So let's respond. I can appreciate the fact that. I can appreciate the fact that there's members of the community that feel like, yeah, they're throwing this in our face, right? And I think, like, I don't want you guys to think that we don't see that's what your message is, right? I can appreciate that. And we also recognize that the prior process was apparently not even hearing anything from it. So we thought that, you know what, it's important for us to hear from you all on different points of time. We recognize that the people who were involved in the lawsuit isn't the whole community, right? So we had the first 2 meetings with the people involved in the lawsuit, because I just happened to be a lawyer. They had a lawyer, we had a conversation. We had a meeting with the mayor. They brought in documents, and we recognize that they represent some of the community, right? Now, as far as the community meetings, there's nothing that says we have to have multiple community meetings. But we thought, you know what, it's important for us to have multiple community meetings because we want to hear from as many people that want to participate in this time period. Now, you may say, well, why the rush? Why the rush? Again, I can't speak to why the rush, but when I'm more into the substance of what you want out of it. So that now, after this, we can sit down and say, you know what, these are the things that the community said they want. I'm gonna also make it my business to sit down with the council members and say, guys, these are some of the things that the community listed out they want. So I'm asking these guys, make sure you're writing down things, so that we can go back to them. Now, when you all appear before the council, they should have some knowledge on at least what was said here. And it's up to them to make the amendments, right? And I'm not trying to put the pressure on the council, but my point is, we recognize the way this was done in the past was completely wrong. We're trying to fix that now by having the dialogue. All right?
And that's what Newark People's Assembly is all about. Some of you, it's your first time coming to a Newark People's Assembly sponsored meeting, but Newark People's Assembly is supposed to represent the voice of the people. It's the newest initiative out of the mayor's office, and we host, myself and Levita, it's only two of us as of now, more staff to come, but we host community meetings so that we hear exactly what it is that you want. Not as an affront to whatever the big issue is, but to actually hear and be able to know and then give to those decision makers. So hopefully they take what it is that you feel into consideration when they're making those decisions. So the next question right here.
Andre.
I'm sorry, Andre, can I just make one
absolutely.
comment? And I appreciate the comments that have been made, and I think that Kenyatta Stewart, our city's legal counsel, is making a point that we all fully understand coming to these meetings. That we want to listen, we want to make improvements. The council is going to demand that we present to them, and as you will, the issues that affect the legitimacy of the ordinance. What can we do to make it better? I know you're upset and you're suspicious, but that's why these meetings are being held, not to beat a dead horse. And yes, we are hopeful that within the next 30 days we can conclude the process. But we may discover that we've got to take longer, that there are too many issues, that the council defers action. We may learn all those things. We've just begun the process. It's been less than a week. And our legal counsel has talked, as well as our planning people, with a number of individuals going back several weeks in preparation for these sessions. We did our best to present an ordinance that we believe makes sense. And obviously, just about everyone in this room probably takes issue with that. Nevertheless, we needed to start with something. We want to go through this process. We'll be going to the planning board. The council is very serious about making sure they represent the interests of the community. And so let's work through the process, identify your issues. Obviously, you're going to express your concerns in ways that may reflect a little bit of your suspicion, but we want to do the right thing, and we'd like to think that we will make adjustments. One thing on the IZO. The IZO is a very serious ordinance that requires that 20% of new housing that gets developed be dedicated to affordability at 40, 60, and 80% of the median. And so that is a serious proposition. That never existed. That happened less than a year ago. And we enforce it at EHD.
Thank you, Director.
Hi, I have one comment and two questions. One comment because this is very personal to me. I was born and raised in the Ironbound. I grew up here. This is where my childhood is. I speak 3 languages, all mixed because of the fact that I grew up in such a diverse community. So this is very personal. You're literally building an establishment on top of my childhood. So we deserve a specific explanation when it hits so close to home to us. But moving on to the questions. First, you mentioned how this establishment would create jobs, but I would like to know what those jobs look like and who these opportunities will be accessible to. Are these jobs primarily low income? Do they not promise any form of upward mobility? And keyword, invest in local businesses, because that's the majority of the Ironbound economy. Investing in local businesses, investing in families that are interested in creating their own local business will help further cultivate this economy in the Ironbound that we have. Second, how will you ensure that current locals in the Ironbound will be able to afford living in these residential and commercial buildings? I would like to know the specific strategies, how you will help Ironbound residents adjust to this change. We deserve it because we want to ensure that we're not betrayed, just like Emily said. Once you build a giant building on top of our homes where people currently live, they become displaced because they won't be able to afford where their home was. So also, if these jobs offered to the Ironbound locals are low income, that's even worse because rent will go up inevitably, right? If that means people with higher incomes will move into the Ironbound because it seems more attractive with this building, and they won't be able to pay for the rent for where they used to live. Key word as to how you can begin to respect our boundaries is, listen to the restrictions, is 120 feet and 10 stories.
So, last year we worked on,
This way they can hear you.
so, what's that say? So last year, we worked on a tax abatement ordinance that speaks to if the city is giving you a tax abatement, you have to include a number of things, right? So one of the things is, as you're building, you have to make, and they use the word best efforts, right? And that's kind of one of those fuzzy words, but you have to do best efforts to make sure that you have Norkers on the project, right? So for example, what does best efforts mean? They have to prove to us that we went out and spoke to the folk who are involved in the community to make sure that we have people from North working on the project. So when we're talking about, employment and things like that, that's what John is talking about. The second piece is with the inclusionary zoning. One of the things that people don't realize is the property owners, because they own the property, right, I can't take it from them. Right? I can't say, you know what, you have to do the following on your property, right? But one of the things that the ordinance speaks to is if I give you something, you have to give me something, right? So when we talk about the inclusionary zoning ordinance, it's because if you get a tax abatement or if you get a variance, you have to include the following, right? And that's our way of making sure that whatever it is, or excuse me, whomever it is building things, include things to make sure it's affordable. Now, am I using the word low income? I'm not using the word low income. I'm using the word affordable, right? Affordable housing. That's for workforce people, right? So hopefully people who live here, who work here, are willing to live here and live in these new locations. The last thing is, listen, we're straight up liars if we sit here and say that the property buyers are not going to go up, right? I'd be a liar. Everybody else here would be a liar. That's a lie, right? If we say, you know what, is things going to go up? Yes, things may go up, right? But that's why we also have the regulatory ordinance, right? So when we see, as all these things are happening, we don't see them as individual pieces. We see them as a blended situation, and that's the same way we do with homelessness and things of that nature. People may see, one piece and say, oh, it's just this here going on. But the way we see these things as a blended process, to try to protect people on different pieces of the structure.
Okay, sorry. So there's two key words it sounds like you're talking about here, like tax abatement and rent control ordinance. So is this a strategy that you think will protect Newark residents as to how they can actually afford rent? And if increase is inevitable, how can you still ensure they're protected? If increasing rent is inevitable, how can you still ensure that Newark residents are protected?
Again, today, because this building went up here, the building across the street probably is worth more than that. Tomorrow, because that building went up, the building down the street is probably worth more than that. So I'm not going to sit here and actually be naive to the fact that as something builds in the parking lot, the building across the street, that property value is going to go up. I mean, it's the truth. It's life, right? But the other thing is that the hope is that they're asking for something. And if they ask for something, we're entitled to something, right? Because guess what? This person can keep their property the way it is, and guess what? It'd be a parking lot, and we have to live with a parking lot. But if he or she decides to build on it, and they want something from the city, they have to do certain things.
When you say we're entitled to something, do you mean you as the people who are in this room, or do you mean the local residents of Newark?
No. So the IZO would address, the inclusionary zoning would address one of your concerns in terms of affordability in apartments. Rent control also does that by saying rents can only increase by a certain percentage to protect people. We're also working on a right to counsel, right? Saying that, it will be law here in Newark that as a resident in a particular building, you're not forcibly evicted without the presence of counsel at that eviction proceeding, right? So we are, to build on what Kenyatta is saying, we are trying to be as inclusive and forward thinking as possible as we do all of these things. And going back to some of your first question, you know, we hire a Hire Work Live initiative, Newark 2020, First Source, minority contractors, affirmative actions. You know, those are all things that are on the books right now to capture and actually anchor, protect Newarkers.
So basically, it sounds like what you're saying is rent control ordinance is the way you're going to protect and protect residents?
But because it's not just, hear me out, it's not just the rent control, right? So
It's not just
which is what you said.
This is what I'm saying, it's the rent control, right? It's the right to counsel. So in other words, rent control says, you know what? If you didn't register your property, right, the courts understand that if you don't register your properties, guess what happens? The case gets dismissed, right? Right to counsel is also, and some people who are working on the right to counsel ordinances can now, right? They understand if you are wrongfully convicted and you come down to where the office is going to be, what happens? We're going to offer free legal support to you.
Yep.
So it's not just an independent support.
Mhm.
It's a blend of things that
Yep.
we have in place.
Yeah.
Okay, so just let me just take a step back. I still don't feel like the question in which what these opportunities look like was answered, because even if you have rent control, if these rents increase slowly to the point where people are not able to afford them, and they currently have a low-income job that offers no form of upward mobility, they're inevitably, in the future, within 10 years, are still going to be evicted and not be able to afford that place.
But again, unfortunately,
It's
as I
called
said,
economy.
this is my property. Kenyatta doesn't own this building, right? But if Kenyatta says, you know what, if you built this building, I expect you to do certain things, then so be it. Realize that if they build it and I do nothing, the property value from the person across the street goes up, and we still can't protect
I
it.
apologize for the interruption, but I was being specifically asking about job opportunities. It still wasn't answered.
Okay,
Like,
let
what
me-
would those
let-
opportunities
let-
look like for people?
And we can drill down on the affordability question and how
These are the
rent
job
control
opportunities
works.
right here.
But we've got in the ordinance requirements that anyone who gets a benefit from the city, any developer, as Chief Legal Counsel stated, needs to do certain things to identify local people who they will hire, from construction to placement in retail jobs that will exist within their building. There are responsibilities and requirements. Now, there are constitutional limits. We can't demand it. Going back 20, 30 years, cities used to be able to do that. Now we have to say best faith efforts. But we demand that developers, builders, retail shop owners have to take affirmative measures to hire people from within the community. Not only the construction, but the permanent jobs that occur afterwards.
Hi, I was wondering if I could ask a couple of very specific questions about some of the language in the ordinance. The first one, that speaks directly to the height limits that you are instituting. For the high-rise multifamily dwellings, which are permitted in the new zone, it reads in MX3 zone for high-rise multifamily with active ground floor use ground floor commercial with commercial and residential above. So how I read that is the regular high-rise rules don't apply for high-rise buildings with a ground floor active use. But what about for high-rise buildings without a ground floor active use? Do they then apply the regular rules, which can go up to 20 stories in height? And similarly, for the detached commercial building type, there are no height limits in the MX3 zone. And that is also a permitted building type in this area. So things like hotels or office buildings without any residential could go up to an unlimited height because there is no height limit set for those building types or those uses, the hotels or offices, those kinds of things. So when the city is saying that they're capping everything at 145 feet, there still remains these loopholes that allow you to do that. And also, I was just wondering why the MX3 zone is being treated differently than other zones when it comes to the building facade transparency. For some reason, there's a reduction in the building facade transparency for ground floor commercial and residential above, and other uses that are listed here. For some reason, the MX3 allows 40% minimum building transparency, where in all other zones it's 50%. Should there really be a difference, and why is there such a small difference being made there? I would think that if this is meant to be an active, transit-oriented development zone, you'd want maximum transparency as possible for all levels in the building to maintain security on the streets, and to maintain a comfortable walking environment for pedestrians. And then I also see that the setbacks were also taken back a little bit compared to the ordinance from last year. And we know that in a lot of these blocks here, we have very narrow sidewalks. And I would think that in order to create a transit-oriented pedestrian zone, you want to maximize the width of the sidewalks as much as possible. So we really would like to see like a 15-foot sidewalk in many areas, where currently you're only seeing 5, maybe 10. And it's difficult to walk around, especially with all of the cars being double parked on the streets all the time. So just a few specific points I'd like the panel to speak about in the ordinance itself.
All right. So on the first point, right, and this goes back to why we're having community dialogue. We could go back and forth as to how the heights in the different zones are defined and codified in this document. But what was agreed on tonight, even before we started this meeting, and I had this conversation with Chris Cock here, is that if for more transparency, we can affirm that our intent is in that in any of those building types, they're not being permitted to go 20 floors. We will put that definition in each box.
That's the intent.
Right?
That's what we intend.
That's what we intend. We don't intend for buildings to be more than 145 feet. So for it to be very clear, we will put that in every one of those boxes, right? But if you're to read the ordinance, right, it says clearly, bold and underlined is new text present in the current zoning ordinance. Strike through the text detected from the current ordinance. So what we are doing here, like when you see it bold and underlined, and it's bold and underlined, bold, in MX3, residential and commercial uses building height shall not exceed 145 feet. But if we have to put that in every box where the different bulk standards apply, we will. We will. We will. Right? Second thing. We will. Second thing, right? Again, in terms of transparency, 10%, 40%, 50%. These are the type of things that are substantive for us. We have made a determination that 40% seems fair enough. But you're saying, no, you know what? Let's say 50%. This is something I'm writing down. This is something that is a community input. This is something that's saying, you know what? We are thinking 40% is good enough. But obviously it's not, because you're saying 50% should be it. So there's a recommendation heard, written down, and will be discussed, right? On the third thing, setbacks. 15 feet as opposed to 12 feet. Well, first, it was 10 feet. 12 feet was recommended. We went with the recommendation. It's not something we just pulled out of the sky. This was a recommendation that we're following up on. All right? So I just want to be clear again that this is not something constructed in the dark of the night with 5 guys in a room. It is something that has been evolving over time, actually. Over time, actually.
Next question.
This question is more for Kenyatta. And this is with the hopes that if this passes, it's at 10 stories and 120 feet. But at 10 stories, 120 feet. If it passes, hopefully that's what it's passed at. You know what I'm saying? If it passes.
Yeah.
And if it passes, I want to know if there can be guarantees where anything that's built in the MX3 site can fall under inclusionary zoning. And also, I guess the other ask is, can we make sure that rent control is enforced in Ironbound? Because right now what we're seeing is that we have so many unregistered buildings. We have so many people that are coming in that don't know their rights and that don't know that rent control exists. So
So a few things. As far as the height requirement, right, and stories and things like that, one of the questions that we talked about was, so one of the things that we talked about was, if we're at 12 stories, or if we're at 10 stories, but the number is 145 feet, does it matter to you, right, as a community, this is probably an important question for you all, does it matter to you that we go 10 versus 12, if it's still 145 feet?
120 feet.
Okay, but my point is, right, so now as far as the rent control enforceability and things like that, one of the things that we have actually spoke to Jay Lee from rent control is we have to beef up rent control, right? And we're actually thinking about doing a whole, campaign on the rent control and the fact that people should be protected and people should, let us know if their landlords are doing certain things. And we're working on that. That's one of the things that we actually were talking about in reference to the right to counsel situation. So that's one of the things that's, again, it's another part of something that can protect the community that we're working on that. Right, we're working on, listen, we need to come up with some signage. We need to make sure that we put a mailer out. We need to come up with something to make sure that more people in the community know about rent control and the fact that, you have protections and that, and again, with the right, and you're part of the right to counsel conversation, that's going to be hidden. And, we have to include, everyone to put right to counsel in rent control or not. So there's a number of things that we're trying to hash out. We recognize it's not perfect. Right? And that's what we're working on. Right? And like any other thing in life, guess what? Ordinances can be amended. It's like the rent control ordinance or the right to counsel ordinance. Later on, if we find out we need to add something, we're going to consider it.
Yeah.
I remember what your third point is. I just remember two.
The other question was, can it be guaranteed that anything that's built in the MX3 zone can fall under inclusionary zoning?
So one of the issues that we have right now is that the inclusionary zoning says that if we give you something, we have the right to take it. Right? So I can't just take your property and say, put him in your property or put 20% in that property if you're not getting it. Right? So when people get tax abatements and people get variances, that's when we have the right to say, because you got that benefit from the community or from the city, we want something from you. So we have to work on a way to try to do something. Now, yes, it's realized though, if someone gets a variance and try to go higher, automatically included. Right? So, we're still trying to work on that issue, on doing this without it being a legal taking of property from the owner.
But the density gets rid of the taking.
Well, I was going to say, technically, aren't you giving them something by changing the zoning in the area?
We're not.
I mean,
Just city action.
If you add density, it gets rid of the taking position.
Lenny then Sergio.
How you doing? I had a couple questions, but a couple statements first. The process needs to have more real involvement. Right now, the things that are being said are not being recorded online, any place we can look at them. So people are just finding out about the process going on, have no place to find what's been changed. The information that's posted is out of date. So they'll be talking about something that isn't up to date, wasting time. My first question is really, why are we following a financial fad that's a fad? It's out of date. The only reason why this so-called financial opportunity exists is because people are getting the hell out of places like New York City. And they're going to the suburbs of New York City, which includes Newark, which includes Patterson, Hoboken, all those. And those people are getting wise. The high-rise time is gone. They stopped building them. Their high-rises are not being filled. They're not getting 100% occupancy. People are not running it, and they started their building process before we did. So why are we following that type of process? We're subsidizing. We're creating a need for a process that's dying. It may go for 10 years, they'll get all the money, but in the end, people who will live there are not vested in Newark. They're going to be financial nomads. They will come in for 10 years while it's good to them, then they're going to move out to our suburbs because the transportation to get them to where they're working just fast enough. They don't need to live here. They can live someplace else and zoom in time to get to work on time without a big hassle. So why are we following that loss? It's like a loss leader. It's like really switch and bait and switch. I hear all these things about the historical New York City where they have all the high rises. People were not connected to the community. They're not connected to the community here either. So why are we following this? They're not going to have the same type of investment as our neighbors now. We're destroying vibrant, living neighborhoods in exchange for some so-called maybe development in another place of the city that they really wanted and needed. We don't have vacant lots in Ironbound. You build something in Ironbound, somebody's going to lose their house, their business, they're going to lose something else. So why are we doing this? We're getting a 145-foot, maybe, hopefully less than that, high-rise. In exchange for that, they might build a two-story something up in the Central Ward where they're looking for development. They're looking for more density in their residential areas. They don't have the housing. There's nothing on the lots there. Find the lots that's vacant here. The only time you really find the lots that's vacant in Ironbound is when they knock your house down. And they're forcing all the small businesses out. They can't afford to stay here anymore. They're forcing all the lower income people out. They can't afford to live here anymore. And there's not jobs being offered in these high rises that are proposed. Unless you want to be a maid, you want to do cleanup and maintenance, you want to do security. That's the bulk of the type of employment you're going to have there. The other types of industries that they're proposing to put in there are not going to have a large number of people being employed. And even when they have those people being employed, I would hazard to guess they're going to come from outside, like they've been doing all the other industries that have moved into this point. So why are we chasing this dream? We're creating a need that's artificial. Subsidizing sustainability, does that make sense to you? In this regard, it's to their own best interest to have a house that is more energy efficient, because the people who live there will spend less money on energy. Not only does it help the community by making us less of an energy sinkhole, but it will help them save money on running their buildings. It'd be cheaper, cooler to heat, and cooler to heat in the wintertime, easier to heat in the wintertime, and easier to cool in the summertime. It's in your best interest. So I have to pay you to do something that's in your best interest? Maybe help you out. I have to pay you to do that? Why does that make sense? The other thing, you're referring to these ordinances is as if somebody else made them. You're writing the ordinances. So when you say, well, we have to follow this ordinances, you wrote the ordinances. And this is why it is more important to listen to the community, because you're destroying our community to build maybe some project up in another part of Newark. It's not helping us. It's getting rid of a community that's working, a community that people are working with. They have been here a long time. They're not here today and they're gone tomorrow. They've been here for years. Most of my neighbors have been here a long time. They're not just getting in here. We have new people, yes. It's not a closed community, but it's a very stable community. You're destroying that. The people who come here, I would bet money, they will not stay here for the length of time that the people have been here before. And they will not be involved in the community. They will not keep things going the way people who have been here up to this point have done. And all this for a dream, a hope, that in somewhere in the other part of New York, they're going to build a nice little something. We don't know what, but that's the give and take. It's more give on our part than we're getting take back from other resources. So I guess, why are we doing that? Why are we giving them so much when they want to come here? Why are we giving them so much to come here for so little return to us?
You finished? Okay. I would take exception to the claim that you make that mid-rise buildings are a thing of the past and that they're obsolete. That just isn't true, and I say that respectfully. That's not true at all. And developers will build if the market permits. And so this is a market-driven economy. We believe that these locations that are in a discrete neighborhood will accommodate properties not to exceed 145 feet. Many may come in at 8, 10 stories. Nevertheless, sir, I would say that your argument that these so-called high-rises are obsolete and a thing of the past is not the case. It isn't the case. I say that honestly. As a practitioner, someone who's been in city government doing development for 40 years. Now, the other questions are relevant. Do we want to create impacts that are unreasonable for the neighborhood? Are there infrastructure issues? Those are all legitimate questions that have been asked. We've got to deal with them. The city does over time, by the way, because many of these issues are going to take hundreds of millions of dollars to repair. In the meantime, can we limit impacts? Can we use good design? Can we do the right kind of construction to limit negative impacts? That's what we intend to do. And so if the market encourages a developer to come in and build a 100-unit building that's 10 stories in height, and he does his pro forma, and he works with the bank and his financial supporters and presents a project and creates a new rateable, by the way, and creates employment for the construction industry and some permanent employment for those who work on the premises. And I wouldn't demean those kinds of jobs, by the way, from security to people who manage property and work on property. So I just think that there is a net benefit if we do this correctly. And I don't know what else to say to the many things.
I'm not demeaning jobs that are low income. What I'm saying is these projects are being held up as this is going to really raise the financial level of people who are here. These jobs will be uplifting. What they were making before, they're going to make a lot more now. It's not true from what I've seen so far. The jobs that they're offering are not high-earning jobs.
Okay.
We hold that up.
Okay.
That's,
Can I just say
what we're
this?
looking at, but that's not what comes in here.
Okay.
That
I disagree.
what I meant.
We are a growing corporate commercial center for the region. Job growth is expanding in Newark. The transit facilities attract new residents and new development. And I'm just telling you for the record that there are interested parties who want to do commercial, retail, and residential development because of our location and because there are vacant tracts of land that are developable, and we ought to be encouraging it to grow the tax base and create jobs and do it in a way, in a discreet enough way to support the neighborhood. And now we have our differences as to whether what we are proposing, and maybe amended, maybe get changed over the next several weeks, is a fair way to accomplish that. I understand that, I recognize that, but for you to say, where are the jobs, the heights are ridiculous, there's no demand, high-rise, mid-rise buildings are obsolete, that's just not the case. It is not the case.
I just see that they've changed here. But my point is, if I have you come in and push out her, and you make more money than she's making, but now she can't afford to live here, have I made the neighborhood better, or have just replaced it? And that's what's happening now. So that was the point.
I think this is one of those points where, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to, is it better for me being there versus the lady there being back here or what have you, that's going to be something that we're going to dispute. Why am I saying? What am I saying? Because if I move into your neighborhood, Kenyatta, for example, right, I'm going to find me a gym here, right, I'm going to support that business. I'm going to go out to eat here, I'm going to support that business. I'm going to do a number of things here just because that's who I am, right? But that may not be everyone, right? On the other hand, as far as my son, right, who also may live here with me, or my cousin who may live here with me, may not have a job, right? And they say, you know what, I'm a Norther, right? I'm born here. And you know what, I want to work in this spot, right? Or I want to become a police officer. And you know what, I want to live in this area, right? So I think the fact that we're going to disagree about how the impact is going to have on the folk, you know what, we're going to argue about that back and forth. Right? We're going to argue about if it's okay that, you know what, the guy whose restaurant is near this building, hopefully, he has a bunch of people coming into his restaurant. He's like, you know what, listen, I wasn't crazy about that building, but my place is booming now. Right? So again, those people may not even eat the food next door. Right? So I can go back and forth with you about if that's going to happen or not. But the point is, at this day and age, we're just trying something that we think, right, with your help, is going to help the city of Newark. And we also like to think the following, right? This is the last piece I'll make before I move on. that, you know what, there's some people in other parts of Newark that are dying over here, that want to live next to you, right? Who's always saying, you know what, I saw that guy before. He's a decent person. I see this guy on TV, or I see this guy in the library, and I want to live next to him. And you know what? I don't want to buy a house. I want to live in a building. Right? So, you know, we're trying our best to do what's right for Newark. Right? And I don't want you to think that, you know, as we do what's right for Newark, we're forgetting about what community we're working on, right? But we're trying to do what's best for Newark. Right? The young lady there said, I live here. Young lady raising her hand right now. I live here. I grew up here. I got an education here. I don't know where she lives right now. And guess what? She may say, you know what? That house or that building that's going up, maybe they got a decent facility inside. It's secure. They got decent parking. I'm never live here. And that's a spear. Now move on.
I would agree with you, except for the fact that the studies that up to this point have shown it has not. You haven't come to live next to me. You've come to take my place. And you know, that type of replacement gentrification is live and well here, which is sad because you're just pushing the people who work to make Newark the place that people want to live here. And this were a small benefit in another part of Newark that's really looking for the development. So you're developing a place that's already thriving. And then the place that's not thriving gets a little something. See, they got something. We lose a lot. They get a little bit.
My last piece of this, my father right now as we speak, he lives in a certain area of Patterson. I'm from Patterson. And him and my stepwife, my stepmother, separated. And guess what? That area of Patterson, when he paid for his house, he's going to make triple what he was selling for. Why? Because something was built near his house. And oh, by the way, he can't wait to get out of it because I'm not there anymore. My stepsister isn't there anymore. He didn't have a property. So again, I recognize what you're saying. We're just trying to do what we can do as, you know, the city to benefit, to do what's going to benefit New York as a whole. And again, not to say that we're discounting what's going to happen in this community, but my point is we're just doing what we think is best for New York as a whole, and hopefully it benefits this community.
Thank you, Mr. Lenny Search. Okay, we're winding down on time, and I think it's about 5 more comments.
Hi, thanks for coming out. One thing I want to talk about is that Kenyatta has made a point, to make a point multiple times, that Plan Newark is not the community. And it's not, and I'll say that it's not. You know, I would probably guess that Plan Newark is probably at the most pro-development edge of the opposers to MX3. You know, I think Joe would agree with that, Chris would agree with that, Lenny would agree with that. But we took the step to like oppose and litigate. Well, yeah. Okay. We took the step. We took the step to oppose MX3 and to litigate against it because it was done quickly and sloppily, and it was a terrible piece of law. It was very, very bad. Not only was it inconsistent with the master plan, but the process sucked. And they did it and rushed it in like about 3 months. And now we're trying to rush it and get it done in like about 33 days or less. So I don't expect that it'll get better when we rush it even faster. But I don't normally speak on behalf of Plan Newark ever. I usually speak on behalf of myself. But today I will gladly stand up here and say that Plan Newark stands for the people. And stands, even if the people have a slightly different impression than maybe some of us might have, on development, we stand for the voice of the people, always. And rushing it is the wrong way. And as we discuss the specifics of the ordinance, we keep pointing out inconsistencies and loopholes and where it just doesn't, it doesn't work for clarity. But one thing is sure, that whatever we do, we should be doing to make Newark better. We should be doing to make Newark better. And so when we are allowing developers to go up more or to go denser because we see a benefit from, we should look to make that a better space, not a worse space. Couple of things that I want to specifically talk about is the active street life, is the ground levels. I know that like immediately around the MX3, there is a lot of low rise, and with the zoning that they have, and their buildings, they're not gonna go much higher than where they are now. You know, they're 2, 3, maybe 4 stories, and partly of the reason we had opposed MX3 is because we envisioned monstrosities like the one that was approved and then struck down by the court. Struck down by the court because MX3 was, 1, inconsistent with the master plan, and then 2, the process was wrong. The process of community input was not followed. But the monstrosity was a monstrosity because, now let me go through. At the ground level, people on every facade, on every side, are looking at 2-story blank walls of parking. Their active streetlight is going to be killed. So that's 1. 2, there's a, if one level of parking is bad because it brings so many cars to the area and makes the streets hard to drive, adding 2 layers of parking makes it even worse because our streets are small and narrow. If we had 4 or 5, lane avenues, maybe Ironbound could accommodate more parking or more cars, but it can't. The reality is that this is a very organic, old, historical neighborhood with narrow streets. We can't accommodate the cars. Maybe you say, well, we're a transit-oriented development, so if we give you a little bit more height, we give you a little bit more density, well, you have to do that without more parking. Or give us back some of the parking so that we can reserve it for other, maybe a hotel or business, or maybe we can use that parking, because the city only gets so much parking and so much car street access. Once you're filled up, every other car that adds to it just is going to make everyone's life worse. And right now, we're at that limit, and we still need, according to you guys, we need to develop a lot more. And many of us would agree with you. But if we're already at our limit of cars, then how does adding more cars to that make it better? It won't. It'll make people's lives, the way they live and experience it, worse. Not just the people that drive, but the people that sit in the bus will sit behind all those cars that aren't going anywhere. And the bus isn't going anywhere, and it just becomes a mess. We're at that, we're already past the point of where we already have too many cars in downtown. At rush hour, we're a small city. It shouldn't take an hour to drive out of the city or into the city or try to get across downtown or across Ironbound. It should not take an hour. We're a very small city. If it's taking more than 10, 15 minutes, we're doing it wrong. And guess what? We're doing it wrong. We have to decrease the cars. We have to. In order for people to be able to live in a way that makes sense for them, where that people can get out easily, people can get in easily, can get around easily. So we have to look at, if we're going to allow builders to go above the 8 that was allowed previously, according to the master plan, that we should look at getting givebacks on-site and off-site. And so by reducing the number of cars that will be in that area would be a good thing. That would be a good place to start. We maybe should think about not adding 2 levels of parking. Maybe not, okay, you want to go up, but we can't give you the 2nd level because our streets can't handle it.
All right, so thanks, RJ, for those comments. So as you were making your comments, right? Oh, sorry.
In the essence of time, I'm going to take 2 more comments from people that we haven't heard from. As we know, the last 2 hours we've been sort of reiterating and rehashing the same thing over and over again. Quite a few of us are taking diligent notes. They'll be reviewed and discussed by the proper parties. I need to hear from Maria and the young lady in the burgundy, and then we'll have closing remarks. Well, we'll do a time check. Oh, and also, if you have not been, if your issue or what you want to speak on has not been discussed, please write it down. We're encouraging you to write it down, give it to one of us, and it will be taken into consideration. So Sergio, the onus was on Serge to secure the place and the time and all that good stuff.
Next Thursday, 6:30, SCP.
All right, so we have one more meeting in this series that's going to be at Sports Club Portuguese, 55 Prospect, correct? 55 Prospect, next Thursday, December.
Sports Club.
This is the, I thought you were saying this is the communication. Lydia is saying she's on vacation. But yeah, so the last of the meeting, well, not the last, but of this series of meetings is gonna be next Thursday, December 6th, 6:30 at Sports Club Portuguese. I encourage everybody to make sure that you register for North People's Assembly so that you do get the communication directly from us. And you encourage others to either go online, come to the meeting so that they can register. But go online, the City of Newark's website, just click on community engagement, Newark People's Assembly, then it says register here.
All right, so can I just address Sergio? No, but can I address Sergio's concerns and questions? So as Sergio was talking, right, and making his points, what I was doing briefly was just reviewing the recommendations that we looked at thoughtfully from Plan Newark. And since you were speaking for Plan Newark, right, under your guidelines of parking, Plan Newark asked us to waive parking requirements. We're not requiring parking. MX3 does not require parking. MX3 permits parking. There's a difference. We are not requiring parking. Second, prohibit parking as a principal use. Parking was never a principal use of MX3, never. And again, all of the transparency guidelines as asked for from Plan Newark, reading our ordinance and reading your guidelines, they are all there. And again, I ask, apart from us having this back and forth banter on 10 floors and 120 feet, as opposed to a maximum height of 145 feet, there is absolutely nothing, and I'll go on record by saying absolutely nothing else in all of Plan Newark's recommendation that we have not followed.
Yeah, I'm going to try to make this very quick, and I'm going to try to be gentle. First, definitely I think that the height should not be, except for everything else, except for the height. The height is the big sticking point here. So I'm not a planner, I'm a regular ass person. I get the step back a little bit, that I understand. I want my sidewalk to definitely be wider, and I want them to capture the stormwater, because I hate the flooding. I understand that part. But the point that really is going to affect me is this height, because as I'm walking and these big buildings next to a small building, that's going to make a difference for me. And I think that that's where we need to reach some level of compromise. 12 stories is not the compromise, right? And like all good negotiations, you came higher, you came down to 12, which seemed like it's where you intended to be from the beginning. Which, that was the impression given. That's the impression still widely held. So I think in the effort, in the spirit of compromise, we do need to, it's not 145 feet. That for me is the sticking point for sure, and what I would like is a big show of faith from the city that you are listening and that you come down to 120, or we can negotiate, but 145 is way too high for me still. That's my main point. But then to the crowd of us, there needs to be a hell of a lot more at the meeting on the 6th, and then we need to all be calling out council people and telling them, they better get in the way of this if it doesn't come down. We need to make sure that this is not just us yelling at these meetings. We need to also yell at our council people, make sure that they do their jobs and represent us. And this is not what we want. So the fact that we're having these meetings is great, but then we need to put the pressure on the council people to make sure that they don't vote something that is 145, and we're requesting that the height come down. All right?
And just to know on your point, right? On your point, you're spot on.
I don't need a note. I just want 120 feet.
Hi, good evening. So, yes, I agree with Maria 100%. But also, I'm here speaking as a resident because this is not my area of work. I don't know a whole lot about this. I know more about environmental issues that, folks have spoken about, like flooding, heat island effect, reasons why we don't want more concrete. There are many good reasons. Emily spoke about climate change. It is happening as we speak. And I just, I mentioned this a year ago, I feel like Newark has the opportunity to do something innovative and forward-thinking, and right now we're still just status quo. You know, we're business as usual, and business as usual is going to be very dangerous in the next 10 years. So in terms of like what we want to see, you know, we were asked what we want to see. We really need flood mitigation. So, you know, those setbacks are super important because we're thinking of things like, you know, green infrastructure, right? You can't do that when when you barely have room to walk on a sidewalk. You can't have even normal tree pits, much less, you know, the type that help mitigate flooding. You know, we're looking at how to make this a more walkable Ironbound. And I know there are lots of cars already, and, you know, to the point about traffic, both human traffic and car traffic, you know, I don't think that the Ironbound can actually sustain the kind of density that maybe your calculations are telling you it can. You know, as a person who lives here, you know, at 3 p.m., at 4 p.m., at 5 p.m., this neighborhood is barely transitable. And I can't imagine more cars and, you know, more people, particularly in the area of Penn Station. The kind of density you're talking about, I think, will make this an unlivable place. And, you know, I can see, like, you know, 4 or 5 years from now, you know, what are architects and planners going to be writing about Newark? Are they going to say, like, this was, you know, a terrible plan that made a city unlivable, you know, in the downtown area? Or, you know, look at this innovative, you know, forward-thinking, environmentally sustainable, people-friendly, you know, development that the city of Newark undertook 5 or 10 years prior. So, you know, I feel like we're at a junction, but again, the thinking has to be a little bit more outside of the box and has to take into account things that most developers don't really care about, right? They are more economically focused. They're not thinking about the types of things that we're thinking about, those of us who want to continue to live here. Despite all of the obstacles, this is where we live. And, you know, for people like me, there's not really anywhere I'm going to go that's much different. So, you know, it was always my intention to try to make this the best place possible for myself and my family to live. So, you know, again, you know, things that make the quality of life better, more walkable, greener, the air more breathable, the streets more passable. Those are the types of things that we want to see with any kind of development. Putting more people upon people, you know, without really increasing the amenities, you know, the amenities, the services, drastically improving the infrastructure could really, you know, actually lead to a situation where 5 or 10 years down the line, you know, we will really be looked at as a city that went the wrong way at a crucial moment. Thank you.
So and thanks for those comments, right? And I know there wasn't a question involved there, but there are comments, and there are mostly comments. Now, if you take a closer look, and we did share out key facts about MX3, and if you really look at the standards we have set for buildings over eight stories, right? It talks about that type of environmental standards you're talking about. It talks about 50% green roofs. It talks about green walls. It talks about that setback. It talks about stormwater infrastructure. It did talk about, you know what, we want to see one bicycle lane, a bicycle rack for every 5 units. It talks about all of those environmental sustainability goals that you're talking about there. And I want to be clear, right? And I think I'm going to trump up my credentials here. I spent 3 years on the Environmental Commission for this city, along with ICC, you know, helping work on our cumulative impact ordinance. So these things are not lost on the planning department of the city of Newark. And that's why these sustainability goals are built in here. They're not lost on us. You know, I'm raising four children in the city of Newark. My son is right now at the library at Rutgers, you know, because there's where he's going to college. So these things are important to me. They're important to me as I live here. They're important to me as I work in a planning office here, because it's important for me. I am your neighbor. I am your neighbor. So it is not lost.
Then fight for us.
And I am. And I'm here to say that there is nothing here There's nothing here that is being planned to displace people in this neighborhood in the next 10 years. There's nothing here for anybody to write about Newark's future as a detriment of what we're doing now. We are cognizant of where we are and where we want to be. And that is why we are not perfect in terms of what we construct, but this is an opportunity for us to perfect that. But again, it would be remiss of me not to say that I and the people in EHD are not hearing you and are responding to you. Take a look at the environmental standards that for building above 8 stories, and you will see that is exactly to your comments what we're trying to capture and prevent.
I'm sorry, but what I didn't mention is in our work at ICC, what we've actually found is as we, almost everything you mentioned also become gentrifying factors. So it's hard to, this is real, When you build it, they will come, and the they is the people who have more money than us. So, it's going to be tricky.
There's a fear, right? So there's that clear and present fear. But what the realities are also, right, is that we have a population here that is vulnerable, and some of these developments help protect the population here that is vulnerable. That is why it is very important for you to think about our IZO, because IZO is a response. IZO is a forward-thinking, aggressive response to that fear, because that is our fear also. And we respond to it, not just with MX3, but there are things that have been done way before MX3 as a response to that fear, because it's our fear also. Okay?
Thank you, Chris. And we have one last comment from the host himself, Mr. Gale. Excuse me. Okay, Mr. Gale.
You accuse my colleagues of retaliating disingenuous. You did not incorporate every single one of your accusations. It's just a fact. You did not incorporate every single one of your accusations.
Here you are. We have the last comment.
We had a meeting, we're going to have another meeting.
I set the record straight.
Excuse me. We had a meeting, we're going to have another meeting. I would hate to
The recommendations are here.
We've been here for 2 hours. We're out of here fighting with each other in a negative tone.
Yeah, apart from their 10 feet, apart from their 10, there. They could look through this and tell us what here.
Sir, there's not.
Let me just say that I don't want to have to deal with the disrespect we set the tone in the beginning, excuse me.
Yeah, but we're being disrespected.
But regarding the meeting, we want to keep it in an orderly fashion, or we will not have the meeting next week. I'll just say that, I'm not.
There's a long list of problems. We need 3 more months. Can we get 3 more months?
Yeah, this got to be shut down. This has to be shut down. Shut it down. We can't, this is too disruptive. It's too disruptive.
Well, I'm not shutting anybody up, but obviously, sorry about that. I was going to make a couple of quick comments, and that would be as brief as possible. First of all, I want to personally acknowledge for a couple of very, very brief comments. First of all, I want to personally acknowledge that I made some comments early in the meeting when I didn't have the floor, and I do apologize for making those comments when I didn't have the floor. I want to acknowledge 2 other things. One is, Kenyatta made a number of statements regarding a number of things that the city is making efforts at regarding equity in the city, and those are accurate statements, and I'm working diligently with you and others on those. Right to counsel is an example. I would say, also contrastly, that our efforts on right to counsel are inclusionary, are intensive and take time and effort, and we don't seem to be within that on this particular matter. I would also acknowledge that you and I would say the same thing about John, who I know can argue and resolve those issues, and I have found, at least in the course of our discussions, a degree of honesty that, I won't question. The problem is that, the process that we, we acknowledge, we have to acknowledge that a lot of us are coming from quote-unquote good places. You have a responsibility to the city, acknowledging that you're working in a neighborhood. You have a responsibility to our neighborhood, acknowledging you have a responsibility within the city. Okay, but how do we reach the sweet spot between those things, such as 10 stories and 120 feet, as an example? And the process has not been set up to reach the sweet spot as we entered this room and saw it. The tone of the meeting has gotten better, and I would say that, the proof obviously will be in the pudding in the end, but what is the next meeting going to be about? Because we can't have this banter all over again. You need to report back to us and give us feedback on a lot of what you heard. That is an exchange and that is dialogue, and we need to know where we stand with 10 stories, 120 feet, or whether you want to continue to go to 145 feet, up zone with little give back. And the sustainability issues, that doesn't address my concerns about equity. Because if you're going to up zone and give the developer so much more, mandate the affordability, for example, or develop the impact fees for connecting to an infrastructure that can't handle it, as far as we can state. So I just think in the next meeting we need some feedback, rather than just simple banter. Anchor has put stuff on the table, never got any response to. So if we want this to be meaningful, it has to have a better process to it. So that's pretty much it. I appreciate everybody being here. And this is a hot issue as we've seen. It was a hot issue last year. We didn't quite learn. Let's learn. And let's get this done in a very positive way by listening and building some sort of consensus here. Thank you.
I appreciate you, Ms. Joe, for allowing us to have the meeting here. Thank you for being an awesome host. I appreciate also everyone for coming out and staying until the end. As we know, and as I heard, this is a hot button issue, and we plan to take your concerns, your suggestions, and your questions, have them answered and take them into consideration so that you do have or get some feedback needed for that next meeting. As you heard, I did get a little frustrated a couple moments ago and was quite ready to cancel the meeting for next week, because it was a special request of Sergio at the last meeting, and I do agree that, there should be an opportunity to discuss, but it's not just about discussing, but actually getting the feedback and it being a give and take. But if it's just gonna be more of this, then there's no point in doing this. So if we can agree to disagree, which is the tone that we tried to set in the beginning, not speak out of turn, be respectful of each other, then I don't mind, having the continued meetings. I also just want to add that it was mentioned earlier about rent control and affordability, and that actually is the topic of the next series of North People's Assembly meetings. So we plan to have more conversation with housing and economic development as it relates to affordability, rent control, living, owning, and renting in the city of Newark. So that's just a heads up. Hopefully we can start having those meetings in or about January. So if you have nothing else to say, no closing remarks, I think everybody said closing remarks. So again, I thank you so much for coming. And please make sure that you register with North People's Assembly to stay abreast of what's going on, and you receive the emails. Thank you so much.